The stars burned cold in the void as the last free worlds of the galaxy sent their final message into space. On 1,000 different planets, alien hands worked desperately at communication arrays, pouring all their remaining power into one last transmission. They had nothing left to lose. Hana sat at her station on the mining platform orbiting Kepler 442b, sipping her morning coffee and watching the endless stream of data scroll across her screens. Space was usually quiet out here, far from Earth and the busy shipping lanes. The miners worked below, pulling rare metals from the planet's crust, while she monitored communications and watched for anything unusual. That's when the signal hit her equipment like a thunderbolt. The transmission was unlike anything in her databases. Multiple alien languages mixed together, some she recognized from old theoretical studies, others completely unknown. But underneath the chaos of different voices, one thing was clear. These beings were terrified. Hana's hands flew over her controls, trying to clean up the signal and separate the different languages. Her translation software worked overtime, slowly building meaning from the alien words. What she read made her blood run cold. "We are the last," the message said. "Our worlds burn. Our children die. The Vorthak Empire shows no mercy to any who resist. They take our strongest as slaves and kill the rest. 17 civilizations have fallen in the past year alone. If anyone can hear this message, if anyone has the power to help, please come. We cannot fight them alone." The transmission continued for hours, detailing horrors that made Hana sick to her stomach. Entire species wiped out for sport. Planets stripped of resources until nothing could live there anymore. Children torn from their families and sold in slave markets across the galaxy. Hana saved every bit of data and immediately sent it through the quantum relay to Earth. She marked it with the highest priority code and added her own message. "This is real," she wrote. "These people are dying, and they're asking for help." 3 days later, Admiral Minho stood in the war room deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, staring at screens filled with alien faces. The translation teams had worked around the clock to decode the message completely. Now he could see and hear the desperation in these beings' voices as they begged for salvation. "How many species are we talking about?" Minho asked his intelligence chief. "At least 40 different civilizations in the transmission, sir. But based on their descriptions, the Vorthak Empire controls hundreds of worlds. They've been expanding for over 2 centuries, conquering everything in their path." Minho studied the star charts his team had created from the alien data. The Vorthak Empire was massive, stretching across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their military seemed unstoppable, using advanced weapons and ships that could destroy entire fleets in minutes. "What do we know about this Vorthak species?" Minho asked. "They're large, heavily armored, and extremely aggressive. Think of a cross between a rhinoceros and a crocodile, but standing upright and carrying plasma weapons. They've built their entire culture around conquest and domination. To them, other species exist only to serve or die." Minho felt a familiar anger building in his chest. He had spent 30 years in the military, fighting against bullies and tyrants, wherever he found them. The idea that these monsters were terrorizing innocent civilizations across the galaxy made him want to hit something. "Sir," another officer spoke up, "we need to consider the risks. We don't know anything about galactic politics or military technology. This could be a trap, or we might be walking into something we can't handle." "Maybe," Minho said, still staring at the images of dying alien children. "But we can't just ignore this. These people are asking for help, and we have the power to give it to them." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what the Admiral was thinking. Humanity had spent the last 100 years building a space fleet supposedly for exploration and defense. But their ships were designed by a species that had learned warfare on a planet where everything tried to kill everything else. Human military doctrine was based on fighting for survival against impossible odds. Get me a full fleet roster, Minho ordered. Every ship that can carry weapons and a crew. We're going to give these Vorthaks something they've never seen before. Over the next week, the message from space dominated every news channel on Earth. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they weren't alone, and their new neighbors were in serious trouble. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Former soldiers came out of retirement. Engineers worked day and night to retrofit civilian ships with military hardware. The shipyards buzzed with activity as humanity prepared for its first interstellar war. Dr. Yunji led the team trying to understand alien technology from the data in the transmission. Their science is incredibly advanced, she reported to the Admiral. But it's also very specialized. They seem to have forgotten how to innovate or adapt. Everything follows the same patterns. What about their military tactics? Minho asked. Very formal and predictable. They line up their ships in neat formations and exchange fire until one side retreats or surrenders. It's like they're following rules for some kind of game rather than fighting a real war. Minho smiled grimly. They've never fought humans before. The Terran Defense Fleet assembled in orbit around Mars, a sight that took humanity's breath away. Massive dreadnoughts floated alongside converted cargo ships. Sleek destroyers escorted former passenger liners now bristling with weapons. It wasn't the most organized fleet in the galaxy, but it was uniquely human, chaotic, determined, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood what humans were capable of when they were angry. Captain Jiwan stood on the bridge of the TDF Retribution, humanity's flagship, and watched the final preparations. Her crew came from every nation on Earth, united by the simple idea that bullies needed to be stopped, no matter how big or scary they were. All ships report ready, Admiral, she announced. Minho took one last look at Earth, hanging blue and beautiful in the distance. They were about to jump into the unknown, to fight an enemy they'd never seen for people they'd never met. It was exactly the kind of impossible mission that humans specialized in. Take us out, Captain, he ordered. Let's go show this galaxy what Deathworlders can do. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth behind and carrying humanity's answer to the galaxy's cry for help. They didn't know what waited for them among the stars, but they were ready to find out. The jump to hyperspace felt different from the simulations. Captain Jiwan gripped her command chair as the Retribution shuddered through dimensions that human minds weren't meant to understand. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically to keep all systems stable during their first real interstellar journey. How long until we reach the target system? Jiwan asked her navigator. 17 hours at current speed, Captain. The alien data was accurate. We should drop out right at the edge of Vorthak space. Jiwan nodded and activated the fleet communication system. Across 47 ships, human crews prepared for battle in their own unique ways. Some prayed to their gods. Others cleaned their weapons or wrote letters home. A few played music loud enough to shake the bulkheads. In the engineering section of the Retribution, Tai Hyung crawled through maintenance tunnels, checking every system personally. The ship's fusion reactors hummed with barely contained power, feeding energy to weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Human technology was different from what the aliens used, rougher, more violent, and completely unpredictable. How are the weapon systems looking? Jiwan asked over the comm. Everything's running hot, Captain, Taehyung replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. The railguns are charged and ready. The missile tubes are loaded with everything we've got. And the close-range defense systems are online. Whatever these Vorthak throw at us, we'll throw something back. 3 decks down, Medic Soman organized her medical bay with grim efficiency. She had no idea what alien biology looked like, but she had studied every piece of data they could extract from the distress signal. The humans weren't the only ones who would be bleeding today. Set up trauma units on decks 5 through 8, she ordered her team. And prep the alien medical protocols. We might be rescuing survivors, and I want to be ready for anything. Her staff worked quickly, setting up equipment that could handle everything from human injuries to completely unknown alien physiology. They had brought medical supplies for a dozen different scenarios, hoping that compassion was universal even if biology wasn't. Across the fleet, similar preparations continued. Marines checked their armor and weapons, knowing they might have, to board alien ships or fight on alien worlds. Pilots ran final checks on fighters designed for Earth's atmosphere but modified for space combat. Engineers made last-minute adjustments to systems that had never been tested under real combat conditions. Admiral Minho moved between ships using shuttles, visiting crews, and making sure everyone understood the mission. They weren't here to conquer or colonize. They were here to stop a genocide and free the innocent, no matter what it cost them. Remember, he told each crew, we're not just representing Earth today. We're representing every free world that's ever stood up to a bully. Make them proud. The hours passed slowly as the human fleet traveled deeper into space than any of their species had ever gone. They were leaving behind everything familiar, jumping into a war that had been raging for decades between civilizations they barely understood. "Captain," the communications officer called out, "I'm picking up transmissions from the target system. It's not good." Jiwan listened to the translated signals with growing anger. Vorthak commanders discussed their latest raids like farmers talking about harvesting crops. They described the destruction of entire cities as routine operations. Worst of all, they laughed about the desperation in the final messages from dying worlds. "How much longer?" she asked through gritted teeth. 30 minutes, Captain." Jiwan activated the fleet channel one more time. "All ships, this is retribution. We're about to drop out of hyperspace into active combat. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and watch each other's backs. These monsters have been terrorizing the galaxy for too long. Today, they meet humanity." The response from 47 ships was immediate and overwhelming. Battle cries in dozens of languages echoed across the communication channels. Human crews, ready for the fight of their lives, carrying the hopes of countless innocent beings who had never imagined salvation could come from such an unlikely source. As the fleet prepared to drop back into normal space, long-range sensors began picking up energy signatures from the target system. Massive Vorthak ships moved in perfect formation around a small planet, systematically destroying everything that moved. Below them, alien refugees fled in small ships while their world burned. "Contact in 10 seconds, the navigator announced. Jiwan took a deep breath and gave the order that would announce humanity's arrival on the galactic stage. "All ships, weapons free. Show them what happens when they mess with the innocent." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace like an avalanche of metal and fury. 47 ships materialized in formation, their weapons already charging and their crews ready for battle. For a moment, the Vorthak fleet continued their bombardment, not recognizing the threat that had just appeared. Then the first railgun fired. The tungsten projectile crossed the distance between fleets at a significant fraction of light speed, striking a Vorthak cruiser amidships and punching completely through its armor. The alien ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist as a functioning vessel, its hull split open and its atmosphere venting into space. "Direct hit on Target 1, reported the weapons officer. "Target eliminated. Around the battlefield." Vorthak ships began turning to face this new threat. Their movements were slow and deliberate, following tactical doctrines that had worked against every other species they had encountered. They formed battle lines and powered up weapons systems, preparing to engage the human fleet in honorable combat. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Captain Jiwan smiled as she watched the alien ships moving into textbook formations. "All ships, attack pattern Delta. Let's show them how Deathworlders fight." The human fleet scattered like a flock of angry hornets, abandoning all pretense of organized formation. Ships accelerated in different directions, using unpredictable flight patterns that made targeting impossible. Some dove toward the planet's surface, others climbed high above the orbital plane, and a few charged directly at the Vorthak battle line. The aliens had never seen anything like it. Their computers couldn't calculate firing solutions for targets that refused to follow logical patterns. Their commanders shouted contradictory orders as human ships appeared and disappeared from their sensors like ghosts, and then the humans opened fire with everything they had. The Battle of Zeltar began with thunder and ended with silence. Commander Hyun-woo led his fighter squadron in the first wave, diving toward the planet's surface, where Vorthak bombers were systematically destroying refugee camps. His pilots followed him through the atmosphere, their small craft screaming through the alien sky like falling stars. "Target the bombers first," he ordered his squadron. "Those people down there can't defend themselves." The Vorthak pilots had never faced fighters, like the human craft, where alien ships moved in precise formations and followed predictable attack patterns. The human fighters twisted and rolled through space like angry wasps. They used the planet's gravity well to build speed, diving toward targets before pulling, impossible turns that should have killed their pilots. Hyun-woo locked onto a Vorthak bomber and fired a burst from his railgun. The small projectiles punched through the alien ship's shields like they were made of paper, shredding the bomber's hull and sending it spiraling toward the surface. Around him, his pilots eliminated target after target with the casual efficiency of apex predators. "This is too easy," his wingman reported. "These guys fight like they're in a parade, not a battle." Above the planet, the main fleet engagement continued with devastating results for the Vorthak forces. Captain Ji-won watched from the bridge of the Retribution as her ship's weapons tore through alien cruisers that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. The enemy's plasma cannons were powerful, but they couldn't hit targets that refused to stay still. "Bring us around for another pass," she ordered. "Target their flagship." The Retribution accelerated toward the largest Vorthak ship, a massive dreadnought that served as the fleet commander's vessel. The alien ship tried to turn its main guns toward the approaching human vessel, but Ji-won had already anticipated the move. "All power to forward rail guns," she commanded. "Let's crack this thing open." The Retribution's main guns fired in sequence, sending a stream of projectiles toward the Vorthak flagship. The first shots penetrated the ship's shields. The second wave punched through its armor, and the third volley reached the vessel's core systems. The massive alien ship shuddered and began listing to one side, its engines failing and its weapons going dark. But Ji-won wasn't finished. "Take us in closer. I want to board that ship." Her crew stared at her in shock. Boarding actions were supposed to be last resorts, desperate moves when all other options were exhausted. But the captain had a different idea about how to end this battle quickly. "Sir," her tactical officer protested, "we don't know anything about their internal layout or defensive systems." "Then we'll learn as we go," Ji-won replied. "Prep the Marines. We're going to show these monsters what happens when they pick on people who can't fight back." Sergeant Do-hyun had been waiting for this moment since the fleet left Earth. He and his Marines had trained for zero-gravity combat, alien environments, and hostile boarding actions. Now they finally had a chance to put that training to use. "Listen up," he told his squad as they prepared to board the Vorthak flagship. "We don't know what we're going to find in there, but remember, these are the same creatures that have been murdering innocent civilians for fun. Show them the same mercy they've shown to others." The Marines moved through the breach in the alien ship's hull like a force of nature. Their kinetic weapons worked perfectly in the zero atmosphere, and their training gave them a massive advantage over defenders who had never faced such aggressive tactics. The Vorthak soldiers were large and heavily armored, but they moved slowly and predictably. They stood in defensive positions and tried to stop the human advance with overwhelming firepower. It might have worked against other species, but humans had learned to fight on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Do-hyun's Marines flowed around the alien defensive positions like water, using the ship's own structure as cover, while they picked off defenders one by one. They moved with a coordination that the Vorthak couldn't understand, not the rigid formation fighting of civilized species, but the fluid teamwork of pack hunters. "Second squad, flank left," Do-hyun ordered. Third squad, take the upper level. We'll punch through the middle and meet at the bridge. The Vorthak commander watched his ship being overrun with growing horror. His soldiers were some of the finest warriors in the galaxy, trained from birth for combat and conquest. But these humans fought like demons, appearing and disappearing from the shadows while his forces fell around him. When the first human Marines reached the bridge, the Vorthak commander tried to surrender. He had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved millions of beings, but he had never faced an enemy that simply wouldn't stop coming. Do-hyun looked at the massive alien creature and thought about all the innocent beings that had died by this monster's orders. His finger tightened on his weapon's trigger. "Surrender not accepted," he said simply. The battle for the Vorthak flagship ended 3 minutes later. Across the system, the remaining alien ships saw their command vessel go dark and made the only logical decision. They ran. The surviving Vorthak ships jumped to hyperspace as fast as their engines could carry them, broadcasting emergency signals to their empire about the nightmare they had encountered. Behind them, they left a system full of wreckage and a planet full of refugees who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. On the surface of Zeltar, the native population emerged from their hiding places to see human ships landing in their cities. The aliens were small and fragile-looking, with large eyes that held generations of suffering. They approached the human landing craft carefully, unsure whether their rescuers were saviors or just different conquerors. Pilot Yuna was among the first humans to make contact with the Zeltari refugees. She removed her helmet and smiled at the gathered aliens, trying to look as non-threatening as possible despite the weapons and armor she carried. "We're here to help," she said through her translator. "The Vorthak won't hurt you anymore." The Zeltari leader, an elderly being whose people had been enslaved for 20 years, looked at this young human woman with wonder. You came because of our message? But we sent it into empty space. We never expected anyone to answer." "Humans always answer," Yuna replied. "When innocent people call for help, we come. That's just who we are." As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, both free and enslaved worlds struggled to understand what had happened. The Vorthak Empire had seemed unstoppable, their military machine crushing everything in its path for over 2 centuries. Now, a single battle had shown that they could be beaten, but the reports from surviving Vorthak forces made no sense to most galactic observers. They spoke of ships that ignored all tactical doctrine, fighters that performed impossible maneuvers, and ground forces that fought with a savagery that civilized beings couldn't comprehend. Deep in Vorthak space, the Empire's leaders studied the battle recordings with growing concern. These humans had appeared from nowhere and destroyed an entire fleet in minutes. Worse, they seemed to actually enjoy the violence, treating warfare like some kind of sport. "What are they?" the Vorthak Emperor demanded. His military advisors had no answer. Every species they had conquered fought according to established patterns. Even the most aggressive civilizations followed rules of engagement and tactical doctrine. But these humans fought like wild animals, using chaos and unpredictability as weapons. "They must be stopped," the Emperor declared. "Mobilize the core fleets, find their homeworld and destroy it before they can spread their madness further." But it was already too late. The galaxy had heard the thunder of human guns, and word was spreading to every enslaved world and hidden resistance cell. The Deathworlders had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 weeks after the Battle of Zeltar, the galaxy buzzed with rumors and fear. In the deepest parts of Vorthak space, emergency meetings were held behind closed doors. On free worlds, hope grew for the first time in generations. And in the hidden corners where resistance fighters gathered, new plans were made. Xenobiologist Yunji worked around the clock in her makeshift laboratory aboard the Retribution, studying samples and data from a dozen different alien species. The rescued Zeltari had been eager to share their knowledge, along with refugees from other conquered worlds who had joined the human fleet. "The political situation is more complex than we thought," she reported to Admiral Minho during their daily briefing. The Vorthak Empire controls over 300 worlds, but they're not the only threat out here. There are other aggressive species, pirate fleets, and something called the hegemony that makes even the Vorthak nervous. Minho studied the galactic map that Yunji's team had compiled from alien data. Red zones marked Vorthak territory, but there were other colors scattered across the star charts: yellow for disputed systems, black for dead worlds, and gray for regions where no one dared to travel. "What about allies?" he asked. "Surely someone else has been fighting back." "A few civilizations have managed to stay independent," Yunji replied, "but they're mostly hiding in remote systems or behind natural barriers like radiation fields. The galaxy has been under the boot of various empires for so long that most species have forgotten how to resist." Intelligence Officer Jae-won entered the briefing room carrying a datapad filled with intercepted communications. His team had been monitoring Vorthak transmissions since the battle, and what they had learned was both encouraging and terrifying. "The Vorthak are in complete panic," he reported. "Their military commanders are demanding reinforcements, their political leaders are calling for negotiations, and their emperor is ordering the complete destruction of our homeworld. They can't agree on how to deal with us, which gives us a significant advantage." Admiral Minho nodded thoughtfully. "What about their military capabilities? Can they match our fleet in a direct confrontation?" "That's where it gets interesting," Jae-won continued. "They have thousands of ships, but they are all built to the same basic design and follow the same tactical doctrine. They've never had to adapt or innovate because nothing has been able to challenge them for centuries. In a straight fight, they would overwhelm us through sheer numbers. But if we can avoid that kind of engagement, we stick to what we do best," Minho finished. "Hit and run, guerrilla tactics, and maximum chaos. How many resistance cells have responded to our broadcasts?" The human fleet had been sending encrypted messages to every corner of the galaxy, offering support to anyone willing to fight back against their oppressors. The responses had been overwhelming. "Over 100 groups have made contact," Jae-won reported. "Everything from organized military units to small bands of pirates who are tired of paying tribute to the Vorthak. Most of them want weapons and training. Some are asking us to liberate specific worlds, and a few are offering to join our fleet directly." Young strategist Ki-woo had been working with all this information to develop a comprehensive campaign plan. At barely 25 years old, he had already earned a reputation for tactical brilliance that impressed even veteran officers. "The key is to avoid giving them time to adapt," he explained, pointing to targets marked on the galactic map. "We hit their supply lines first, cutting off resources to their frontline forces. Then we liberate slave camps and recruitment centers, depriving them of their workforce. Finally, we start taking key systems that control their communication and transportation networks." His plan was aggressive and risky, requiring the human fleet to be in multiple places at once while staying ahead of Vorthak reinforcements. But it was also exactly the kind of unpredictable campaign that would keep their enemies off balance. "What about casualties?" Admiral Minho asked. "We're a long way from home, and we can't replace losses easily." "That's why we need to be smart about this," Ki-woo replied. "We use our alien allies to handle garrison duties and defensive operations. We save human forces for the missions that require our unique capabilities, and we make sure that every victory gains us more ships and crew than we lose." The strategy was put into action immediately. Human strike forces began hitting Vorthak supply convoys across 3 sectors, appearing without warning and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Each successful raid netted weapons, ships, and freed slaves who could provide intelligence about enemy operations. Captain Sunho commanded one of these strike forces, leading a mixed squadron of human and alien vessels against a major Vorthak logistics hub. The enemy had stationed a full battle group to protect the facility, expecting a direct assault that never came. Instead, Sunho's forces approached from multiple directions, using asteroid fields and radiation storms as cover. When they struck, It was with surgical precision that targeted the facility's most critical systems while avoiding unnecessary casualties. "Remember," he told his pilots, "we're not here to destroy everything. We're here to send a message. Take what we can use, free who we can save, and leave them something to think about." The raid was over in 30 minutes. The Vorthak battle group arrived to find their logistics hub in ruins, their supply ships captured or destroyed, and over 2,000 alien slaves freed. Painted on the facility's main building was a simple message in multiple languages. "The fair Deathworlders are coming." News of the raid spread across both sides of the conflict within hours. On Vorthak worlds, military commanders demanded more ships and troops to defend against the human threat. On enslaved planets, resistance fighters began planning their own operations, inspired by the example of beings who had crossed the galaxy to fight for strangers. Dr. Min Yung worked with liberated slaves to establish field hospitals and refugee camps on worlds that had been freed from Vorthak control. Her medical teams treated injuries and diseases that human doctors had never seen before, while also providing psychological care for beings who had suffered under alien oppression for decades. "The physical wounds heal quickly," she reported during a medical briefing. "But the psychological trauma runs much deeper. These people have lived in fear for so long that they can barely believe they're really free. They keep expecting the Vorthak to return and punish them for accepting our help." Her work went beyond medicine, though. Every freed slave was a potential source of intelligence about Vorthak operations. Every rescued family had information about other camps, other worlds, other opportunities to strike back against the Empire. The human fleet grew stronger with each victory. Captured Vorthak ships were retrofitted with human weapons and crewed by liberated slaves eager for revenge. Former prisoners became guides and translators, helping human forces navigate the complex politics of galactic civilization. But the Vorthak were learning too. After losing dozens of facilities and thousands of ships, their military finally began adapting their tactics. They started using unpredictable patrol routes, hidden supply bases, and false intelligence to lure human forces into traps. The first such trap was sprung in the Kepler system, where intelligence suggested a major Vorthak prisoner transport was moving 1,000 high-value political prisoners. When Captain Jiwan's task force arrived to intercept the convoy, they found themselves facing a carefully planned ambush. "It's a trap," her tactical officer reported as enemy ships appeared from behind sensor shadows. "We're outnumbered 5-1. Jiwan studied the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Vorthak had finally learned to think like humans, using deception and misdirection instead of relying on brute force. It was a sign that they were adapting, which made them more dangerous but also proved that the human campaign was working. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "Let's show them that we can adapt too." The battle that followed was nothing like the one-sided massacre at Zeltar. The Vorthak had positioned their forces carefully and coordinated their attacks with newfound tactical flexibility. But they had also underestimated humanity's ability to think on their feet when things went wrong. Instead of fighting the battle, the enemy expected, Jiwan's forces scattered and regrouped, using the system's asteroid belt as cover while they picked off isolated enemy ships. When the Vorthak tried to corner them, the humans simply disappeared into hyperspace, only to reappear behind their pursuers minutes later. By the time the battle ended, the trap had become a victory for the human forces, but it had also served as a warning that their enemies were getting smarter and more desperate. The easy victories were over, and the real war was just beginning. The Vorthak homeworld of Thakmor had never known fear. For 1,000 years, it had been the beating heart of an empire that stretched across the galaxy, sending out fleets to conquer and ships to bring back the wealth of countless worlds. Its massive cities housed billions of Vorthak citizens who had grown fat and comfortable on the suffering of others. Now, for the first time in their history, the inhabitants of Thakmor looked up at their skies with terror. Captain Sunho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final preparations for humanity's most ambitious operation yet. Around him, the combined human-alien fleet had grown to over 300 ships, captured Vorthak vessels, alien resistance fighters, and the original human fleet that had started this war months ago. "Final ship status report," he called out. "To his communications officer, all vessels report ready for combat, sir. The alien squadrons are in position, and our human forces are standing by for the initial assault. Admiral Minho sends his regards and reminds you that the whole galaxy is watching." Sunho nodded grimly. The attack on Thakmor would either end the Vorthak Empire or destroy the alliance that had fought so hard to reach this point. Intelligence suggested that the enemy had assembled their entire remaining fleet, over 1,000 ships, to defend their homeworld. It would be the largest space battle in galactic history. "Begin the attack," he ordered. The first wave consisted entirely of alien vessels crewed by former slaves who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. They jumped into the outer system and immediately came under fire from orbital defense platforms that could destroy a small moon. But their sacrifice bought time for the real assault to begin. Dr. Min-young worked frantically in her command post on the moon of Kepler-7, coordinating medical support for what promised to be the bloodiest battle of the war. Her teams had established field hospitals on a dozen different worlds, ready to receive casualties from multiple species and treat injuries that would result from weapons no doctor had ever seen before. "We're receiving the first casualty reports," her aide announced. "Heavy losses in the first wave, but the alien crews knew what they were signing up for. Their sacrifice is giving our main force the opening they need." Min-young felt a familiar weight in her chest as she watched the tactical display. Each blinking light that disappeared represented a ship full of beings who had chosen to die fighting rather than live as slaves. She had treated many of them over the past months, patching up their wounds and listening to their stories of loss and hope. "Prep all surgical units," she ordered. "This is going to be a long day." The second wave hit the Vorthak defenses like a hammer blow. Human ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect coordination, their weapons already charged and their targeting systems locked onto the enemy's most critical installations. Captain Sunho led the assault personally, taking his task force directly into the teeth of the orbital defense grid. "All ships, follow my lead," he broadcast to the fleet. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species that has ever suffered under these monsters." The battle was chaos beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Vorthak ships moved in their traditional formations, trying to use superior numbers and firepower to overwhelm the attackers. But the human-led alliance fought with a desperation and creativity that no military doctrine could account for. Alien crews piloted their ships with reckless abandon, ramming Vorthak vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Human fighters weaved through the massive capital ship engagement, targeting critical systems with surgical precision. And throughout it all, the liberated slaves fought with a fury that terrified even their allies. Colonel Junho led the ground assault on Thakmor's surface, commanding a mixed force of human marines and alien resistance fighters. Their mission was to penetrate the planet's shield generators while the space battle raged overhead, a task that required them to fight through the most heavily defended city in the galaxy. "Remember the briefing," he told his troops as their landing craft approached the surface. "The Vorthak have been using this planet as a base for genocide for centuries. Everything you see down there was built with the blood of innocent beings. Show them the same mercy they've shown to others." The landing was opposed every step of the way. Vorthak ground forces had turned their capital city into a fortress, with defensive positions on every street corner and automated weapons systems, covering every approach. But they had never faced an enemy that fought with such coordination and determination. Junho's forces moved through the city like a storm, using the urban environment to their advantage while avoiding the kind of pitched battles that would favor the defenders. They struck at shield generators, communication centers, and command posts, systematically dismantling the planet's defenses while the space battle continued overhead. Deep beneath the city, they discovered something that made even hardened soldiers stop and stare in horror. The Vorthak had built vast underground complexes housing millions of slaves from dozens of different species. Entire civilizations lived in darkness, their only purpose to serve their masters' needs. How many? Junho asked his intelligence officer as they surveyed the nightmare below. Preliminary scans suggest over 10 million beings, sir. Some of these chambers haven't been opened in decades. They've been keeping entire species as livestock. The discovery changed everything about the mission. What had started as a military operation to destroy the Vorthak Empire became a massive rescue effort to save millions of innocent lives. Human and alien forces worked together to evacuate the underground complexes, while the battle for the planet continued around them. Above the surface, the space battle had reached its climax. The Vorthak fleet was larger and more heavily armed than anything the Alliance had faced before, but they were also fighting to protect their homeworld for the first time in their history. Desperation made them sloppy, and fear made them predictable. Captain Sunho watched as the enemy formation began to collapse under pressure from multiple directions. His own ship had taken heavy damage, but it was still fighting, and the crew showed no signs of giving up. All ships, final push, he broadcast to the fleet. Break their lines and take down their command vessel. End this war today. The Alliance fleet converged on the massive Vorthak dreadnought that served as the enemy flagship. The ship was larger than anything humans had ever built, armed with weapons that could crack planets and protected by shields that had turned aside. The combined fleets of entire civilizations. But it had never faced humans before. The attack came from every direction at once. Fighters strafed the ship's weapon emplacements while bombers targeted its shield generators. Cruisers and destroyers hammered its hull with everything they had, and desperate alien crews rammed their ships into critical systems when their weapons failed. Inside the dreadnought, the Vorthak Emperor watched his empire crumble around him. His military advisors reported system failures across the ship and total collapse of their defensive lines. The beings he had dismissed as primitive savages were systematically destroying everything he had built. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "We are the master race. We have conquered the galaxy. How can these animals defeat us?" His aide, a young Vorthak officer who had grown up hearing stories of their species' greatness, looked at the tactical displays with growing understanding. "Because they fight for something we've forgotten, my lord. They fight for each other." The Vorthak dreadnought's shields finally failed under the concentrated assault. Human Marines led by Sergeant Dohyun breached the hull and began fighting their way toward the bridge, while explosions rocked the massive ship from stem to stern. On the planet's surface, Colonel Junho's forces had finally reached the main shield generators. The complex was defended by the Vorthak Emperor's personal guard, elite warriors who had never known defeat. But they had also never faced humans who were fighting to free millions of slaves. The battle for the shield facility was brutal and personal. Junho himself led the final assault, fighting hand-to-hand with Vorthak guards who stood twice his height and weighed 3 times as much. But size and strength meant nothing against speed, skill, and absolute determination. When the shields finally fell, the planet lay defenseless before the Alliance fleet. But instead of orbital bombardment, the ships began landing in every major city, disgorging troops who had come not to conquer, but to liberate. The war for Thakmor was over, but the real work was just beginning. The throne room of the Vorthak Emperor had been built to intimidate. Massive columns supported a ceiling that disappeared into shadows, while walls displayed the conquered banners of hundreds of defeated civilizations. At the center of it all sat a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, where the ruler of the galaxy's most feared empire had held court for decades. Now General Young-Su stood before that throne, watching as the last emperor of the Vorthak Empire tried to understand how his 1,000-year reign had come to an end. The alien was massive even by Vorthak standards, nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor that had turned aside assassins' blades and energy weapons. His species had bred themselves for dominance, creating rulers who could physically overpower any challenger to their authority. "You dare enter my presence, human?" the Emperor growled, rising from his throne with surprising grace for such a large creature. "I have crushed entire civilizations. I have burned worlds and enslaved species. What can one small primate do against the might of the Vorthak Empire?" Young-Su looked around the throne room, noting the alien guards who lay unconscious or dead throughout the chamber. His path to this confrontation had been paved with the bodies of the Emperor's elite protectors, warriors who had never lost a battle until they met humans who fought with no regard for their own safety. "Your empire is over," Young-Su said simply. "Your fleets are destroyed, your worlds are in rebellion, and your slaves are free. The only question now is whether you surrender or die." The Emperor laughed, a sound like grinding stone that echoed through the vast chamber. "Surrender? To you? I am the apex predator of this galaxy. I am evolution perfected. I am—" Young-Su moved faster than the alien's eyes could follow. One moment he was standing several meters away, hands empty and posture relaxed. The next, he was behind the Emperor, one arm locked around the massive creature's throat while the other held a combat knife to its neck. "You were saying?" Young-Su asked quietly. The fight was over before it truly began. The Emperor, despite his size and natural weapons, had never faced an opponent who combined human speed with a lifetime of training in the deadliest martial arts Earth had to offer. When his body hit the throne room floor, the sound echoed through the palace like thunder. Across the galaxy, news of the Emperor's death spread faster than hyperspace communication. On every Vorthak world, military commanders and political leaders watched their civilization collapse as word reached them that their seemingly invincible ruler had been defeated in single combat by a human warrior. But the real changes were happening on the worlds that had been enslaved for generations. Communications specialist Nari worked around the clock to coordinate with newly freed civilizations, helping them establish temporary governments and defense forces while they recovered from decades of oppression. "The response has been overwhelming," she reported to Admiral Minho as he reviewed status reports from across the former empire. 300 worlds have declared independence in the past week alone. Most of them want to establish trade agreements with Earth, and about half are requesting human military advisors to help build their own defense forces. Minho studied the reports with mixed feelings. The victory over the Vorthak Empire had been complete, but it had also created a power vacuum that could lead to chaos if not handled carefully. The galaxy was looking to humanity for leadership, a responsibility that no human had ever imagined they would bear. "What about the Vorthak themselves?" he asked. "How are they adapting to being just another species instead of the master race?" "It varies by world," Nari replied. "Some are trying to maintain their old ways and have had to be discouraged. Others are genuinely attempting to reform and make amends for past atrocities. A few have even volunteered to help with reconstruction efforts on worlds they previously enslaved. The process of rebuilding the galaxy was massive and complex. Dr. Minyoung led medical teams to worlds where entire populations needed treatment for diseases and malnutrition that had been ignored under Vorthak rule. Engineer Taehyung worked with alien scientists to repair infrastructure and establish communication networks between isolated worlds. But perhaps the most important work was being done by people like Captain Ji-won, who led mixed human-alien patrols. Through systems where pirate fleets and warlords were trying to carve out their own little empires from the wreckage of Vorthak space. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, her tactical officer reported. "Unknown vessel, not responding to hails." Ji-won studied the sensor readings with practiced eyes. The ship's configuration and energy signature matched those of the hegemony, one of the other major powers that the aliens had warned them about. Unlike the Vorthak, who relied on brute force and intimidation, the hegemony was known for subtlety and manipulation. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Let's see what they want." The face that appeared on her screen was humanoid but clearly alien, with pale blue skin and eyes that held an intelligence that made Jiwon uncomfortable. The being studied her with obvious interest before speaking in perfect English. "Greetings, Captain. I am Ambassador Zethkara of the Hegemony. We have been watching your species with great interest since you began your liberation campaign. We would like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." "I'm listening," Jiwon replied carefully. "The galaxy is in chaos following the collapse of the Vorthak Empire. Many worlds are defenseless, resources are scattered, and there is no central authority to maintain order. The hegemony could provide stability and structure, with your people serving as our military arm. Together, we could bring peace to this region of space." Jiwon felt a familiar anger building in her chest. She had heard similar offers before, from bullies who wanted to use human military strength for their own purposes while keeping all the real power for themselves. "Counteroffer," she said with a cold smile. "You stay in your own territory, we'll handle things out here, and everyone stays happy. Decline that offer, and you'll discover why the Vorthak aren't around anymore to answer their communications." The ambassador's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those alien eyes that suggested Jiwon's message had been received and understood. "We shall consider your suggestion, Captain. But remember, the hegemony has resources and allies that even your remarkable species might find challenging. Perhaps we will speak again soon." The communication ended, leaving Jiwon staring at a blank screen while her crew waited for orders. The Vorthak had been defeated, but they clearly weren't the only threat in this galaxy. Humanity had announced itself as a major power, and now others were testing their resolve. "Set course for the Galactic Council Station," she ordered. "It's time to make our position clear to everyone." The Galactic Council had been a minor organization under Vorthak rule, little more than a forum where enslaved species could beg for mercy that never came. Now, with the Empire gone, it was attempting to restructure itself as a genuine governing body for the free worlds of the galaxy. Admiral Minho stood before the assembled representatives of dozens of species, looking out at beings whose civilizations spanned millennia, but who had forgotten how to stand up for themselves until humans had shown them the way. "The Terran Federation accepts your invitation to join this council," he announced, "but we want to make our position clear from the beginning. We didn't cross the galaxy to replace one empire with another. We came because innocent people called for help, and we answered." The chamber was silent as representatives struggled to understand this concept. Most galactic civilizations made decisions based on profit, territory, or political advantage. The idea that an entire species would risk everything to help strangers was almost incomprehensible. "We will continue to patrol the spaceways," Minho continued. "We will respond to calls for help from anyone who needs it, and we will oppose any group that tries to build a new empire on the suffering of others. That includes former allies as well as former enemies." His words were broadcast across the galaxy, reaching every world and species that had heard about the mysterious Deathworlders who had appeared from nowhere to topple the greatest empire in galactic history. On thousands of worlds, beings who had lived in fear for generations looked up at the stars with new hope. In the dark corners of space where pirates and warlords were planning their next moves, the message was received with very different feelings. The galaxy had learned that somewhere among the stars, a species of warriors kept watch. They came when called, fought when needed, and asked for nothing in return except the chance to help those who couldn't help themselves. The age of empires was over. The age of humanity had begun. Years later, when alien children asked their parents about the time before freedom, They would hear stories about the day the galaxy cried out for help, and how, from a small blue world on the edge of nowhere, Deathworlders had answered that call with ships full of thunder and hearts full of righteous fury. The stars would never be the same.